The Los Angeles fire was more than just a fire. It was a tragedy, a story of loss, survival, and destruction. It all began on an ordinary morning when the air was crisp and the sun was peeking through the clouds, casting a soft golden light over the sprawling city. But this ordinary morning would soon be eclipsed by an unimaginable force, one that would ravage entire neighborhoods, turn homes into ash, and change lives forever. It started on a quiet hillside, the kind of place that offered breathtaking views of the city below. The land, dry and parched from months of drought, was ripe for disaster. There were no warnings, no signs, just the sudden crackle of dry grass giving way to the first spark. Perhaps it was an errant cigarette tossed aside carelessly, or maybe it was an electrical fault in a power line, but whatever it was, it didn't matter. The fire was hungry. It spread quickly, devouring everything in its path. At first, it seemed like a minor concern, just a few flames licking at the edges of the hillside. People went about their day, unaware of the danger creeping closer. But as the winds picked up, so did the fire's ferocity. The flames began to climb higher, jumping from tree to tree, from bush to bush. Before anyone realized what was happening, it had jumped the small creek that had once been a safe barrier, and now it was headed straight for the homes on the edge of the city. It didn't take long for the sirens to start wailing, and soon the streets were filled with firefighters, emergency responders, and police officers. But despite their best efforts, the fire was unstoppable. It had already grown too large, too fierce, too fast. The fire was relentless, consuming everything it touched. Entire neighborhoods, once bustling with life, were now reduced to smoldering ruins. Families were torn apart as they fled, some escaping with nothing but the clothes on their backs, others losing loved ones in the chaos. The smoke, thick and suffocating, filled the sky, blotting out the sun and turning day into night. People could hardly see where they were going, could barely breathe in the choking air. But they ran and they ran for their lives. No one knew where the fire would strike next, or who would be left behind. As the fire spread, it swallowed entire communities. The streets, once familiar and full of life, were now eerily empty. The sound of crackling flames echoed through the air, mixing with the cries of families and the desperate shouts for help. People huddled together in parking lots, at shelters, or wherever they could find safety, watching helplessly as their homes disappeared in the inferno. It wasn't just the physical loss that hurt, it was the loss of memories, of lives built over decades, gone in the blink of an eye. As the fire raged on, it became clear that this wasn't just another wildfire. This was a catastrophe, an event that would leave scars not only on the land but also on the people who lived through it. The stories of survival were incredible, but so were the stories of heartbreak. One family, caught in the fire's path, was forced to make the most agonizing decision of their lives. They had to leave behind their elderly father, who was unable to flee fast enough. His wheelchair was too heavy, and there was no time to help him. As the fire roared toward them, they had no choice but to leave him behind, praying that somehow he would be okay. They didn't know if they would ever see him again. In another neighborhood, a mother and her 2 children were trapped in their home as the flames closed in. The heat was unbearable, the smoke overwhelming. The children were terrified, crying, asking their mother if they were going to die. With no way out, the mother held them close, telling them that everything would be all right, even though she knew the chances were slim. They were rescued just in time, but they could hardly believe it when they saw their home reduced to ashes. Everything they had worked for, everything they loved, was gone. And then there were the firefighters, who fought tirelessly to save the city they loved, knowing that they might not make it out alive. They worked around the clock, battling the flames with everything they had. But the fire was a relentless beast, and no matter how hard they fought, it kept coming, threatening to engulf them as well. For many of them, it wasn't just a job. It was personal. They had families in the city, homes they wanted to protect. Some of them did make it home, but others did not. They gave their lives to save others, and that sacrifice would never be forgotten. The fire lasted for days. The sky was filled with smoke, the air thick and choking. The smell of burning wood, of destruction, lingered long after the flames were extinguished. And even once the fire was contained, the work was far from over. The damage was done, and the city would never be the same. The recovery process was slow and painful. Communities came together, offering help to those who had lost everything. Shelters were set up and donations poured in. But the emotional toll was immeasurable. People mourned their losses, not just of property but of lives, of memories. They tried to rebuild, but there was always that feeling of something missing, of something irreparably broken. The scars left by the fire were deep, and they would never fully heal. In the weeks and months that followed, the city began to pick up the pieces. People returned to their homes, some to find only rubble, others to discover that their homes had somehow survived. But even for those whose homes were spared, the emotional weight of what had happened was heavy. The fear of another fire, the anxiety of wondering if they would be next, hung over them like a dark cloud. The fire had changed Los Angeles, and it had changed its people. It reminded them of the fragility of life, of how quickly everything can be taken away. It taught them that sometimes, even in the face of destruction, there is hope, that even in the darkest of times, people will rise, they will rebuild, and they will survive. But it also reminded them of the devastating reality of what could be lost in the blink of an eye. As the months turned into years, the memory of the fire faded, but it never fully left. The people of Los Angeles carried it with them, a reminder of their strength, their resilience, and their ability to endure. And in the years that followed, they would always remember those who didn't make it out, those who were lost in the flames. The fire may have been extinguished, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. It wasn't just a fire, it was a story of survival, of loss, of courage. It was a story of a city that had been tested, and in the end had proven that no matter how devastating the fire, no matter how fierce the storm, there was always a way to rebuild, to rise again. And so, as the sun set over the city, the people of Los Angeles, scarred but unbroken, looked to the future. They knew that life would never be the same, but they also knew that they were stronger because of what they had been through. The fire had taken much from them, but it had also given them something far more valuable: the unshakable belief that, no matter what, they would always stand together. The Los Angeles fire was not just a tragedy. It was a testament to human resilience and strength in the face of unimaginable loss. Its story was one of chaos, fear, and desperation, but it was also one of hope, unity, and rebirth. It didn't start with an explosion or a dramatic cinematic scene. It began as a whisper in the dry brush, a quiet spark that ignited into a blaze of destruction. Yet it carried within it the essence of change, a force that would reshape lives, communities, and ultimately, the soul of the city itself. As the fire spread, it began to consume vast stretches of dry land, moving from the hills into neighborhoods that had been established for decades. These neighborhoods were not just homes, they were communities where friendships had been formed, where children had grown up, where generations had lived. The destruction of these places was not just a physical loss, but the erasure of memories, history, and the collective identity of those who lived there. It was an assault on not just structures, but the spirit of a people. The firefighters on the front lines knew this. They weren't just trying to save homes, they were fighting to protect more than bricks and mortar. They fought to preserve the emotional fabric of a city, to keep intact the very heart of Los Angeles. They were exhausted, often battling for hours in extreme conditions, their bodies drenched in sweat, eyes stinging from smoke. Yet they continued, knowing that every second counted, that one more house saved meant one more life preserved. But even with their valiant efforts, the fire grew faster than they could contain it. The winds carried embers into unexpected areas, jumping from roof to roof, igniting dry trees and bushes. The scale of destruction became apparent when entire streets turned into blackened paths of ash. The fire devoured everything: houses, cars, memories, and even future possibilities. Some tried to fight it themselves, forming human chains to douse the flames with garden hoses, but it was like trying to stop an ocean wave with a teacup. It wasn't just material things that were lost. The fire took away lives. People were trapped in buildings, overcome by smoke and flames before rescue could arrive. Loved ones lost contact, unsure if they would ever find each other again. In the middle of the chaos, there were moments of heroism, where neighbors risked everything to save each other. One woman dragged her elderly neighbor from his home as flames raced towards them, shielding him from the inferno with her own body. Another young man ran into a burning apartment building, saving 2 children while firefighters battled the blaze. The fear wasn't just about losing property. It was the fear of displacement, of being forced to leave behind everything one had ever known. Families awoke in the middle of the night to sirens, to the frantic pounding of flames just outside their doors. Some fled with only the clothes on their backs, unable to grab even a single photo or treasured object. Children were woken abruptly from their beds, left crying in the streets, clutching their parents, unsure of where to go or what would happen next. This fear grew exponentially as the fire moved closer to downtown Los Angeles, threatening iconic landmarks like the Hollywood sign, Griffith Observatory, and historic districts that defined the city's character. People watched with a mix of horror and disbelief as smoke blotted out the skies, turning the city into a scene from a post-apocalyptic film. The daytime sky became a murky gray, filtering sunlight in such a way that the city seemed shrouded in perpetual twilight. Power lines fell, cutting electricity to entire blocks, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. Even within the chaos, there were small acts of kindness and connection. Communities rallied together, forming volunteer groups to distribute supplies and aid those who had lost everything. Strangers opened their homes to displaced families, offering shelter in the face of overwhelming loss. It was in these moments of crisis that the true nature of a community emerged, not as a collection of individuals, but as a network of people supporting one another through shared pain. Still, for those directly impacted, rebuilding was a long and difficult journey. The process of restoration wasn't just about physically rebuilding homes, but re-establishing a sense of normalcy and emotional stability. Many spent months, if not years, sorting through the remains of their homes, salvaging what they could. Photographs charred beyond recognition, mementos reduced to ash. Each item lost was a reminder of what had been torn away. Yet, even in this despair, there was resolve. Those affected took what little they had and began again, finding strength in the community around them. The fire didn't discriminate. It impacted the wealthy, the poor, the middle class, anyone and everyone in its path. In some ways, this random, indiscriminate destruction united people. No amount of money could save a home if the fire came for it. The destruction was equalizing in its randomness. For the first time, people saw each other not as neighbors divided by socioeconomic status, but as fellow human beings united in suffering and loss. Despite the fire's intensity, there were moments of beauty and rebirth. The land, once scorched and barren, began to show signs of regrowth. Where once there were smoldering ruins, green shoots began to push through the earth. In nature, fire is both destructive and regenerative. It clears the old, making way for new growth. The scars left behind, blackened trees, damaged homes, were reminders not just of destruction, but of survival, of the resilience of life itself. The fire also led to reflection on the city's infrastructure, with discussions emerging about fire prevention and emergency preparedness. Some wondered how such devastation could have been prevented, how the city could have better prepared for a crisis of this magnitude. Warnings that had been ignored, aging infrastructure that had not been maintained, and policies that failed to address long-term risks became subjects of public discourse. The city began to reevaluate its approach to wildfire prevention, investing in better fire breaks, more resilient building codes, and enhanced emergency response protocols. As months turned into years, the city moved forward, slowly but surely. New communities were built on the ashes of the old, and landmarks that had been damaged were rebuilt with care and purpose. Yet, scars remained, visible reminders of the fire's devastation, but also symbols of the city's resilience. People spoke about it not only as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a moment when Los Angeles realized its vulnerability and strength in equal measure. Though the fire had ended, the memory of it would linger. For those who lived through it, it was an event that reshaped their view of the world. It reminded them that life is fragile, that disaster can strike when least expected, and that in the face of such events, community matters more than anything else. The fire had taken much, but it had also given something profound: an awareness of the interconnectedness of life, a renewed appreciation for what it means to rebuild, and a deeper understanding of resilience in the face of adversity. In time, the stories of survival would fade into history books, recounted only in the solemn voices of those who lived through it. The fire, a once unrelenting force, would be remembered not as just a disaster, but as a defining moment that shaped the spirit of Los Angeles, leaving behind both ashes and a phoenix that would rise from the flames.